Welcome to the BMX Commentator Podcast with your host, BMX World Cup and World Championship commentator, Rich Eames. You'll hear casual yet in-depth stories from BMX athletes and coaches, industry leaders, and all manner of BMX-connected people as we dive deep behind the scenes into what makes BMX racing the best sport on two wheels. Grab a spicy snack and your favorite beverage and get ready to listen in as the gate drops on yet another killer BMX conversation.
All right, welcome to episode 11 of the BMX Commentator Podcast. My name is Rich Eames, UCI BMX Racing World Cup and World Championships commentator, bringing another guest to you today, and I'm absolutely delighted to bring on my third PhD holder since I actually started this podcast. We've done 11 episodes now, and this is the third person we've had on with a PhD. I can't believe it. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to bring on the holder of that PhD, Dr. Adam Brazil, sports biomechanics. Biomechanist, is that correct? Biomechanist?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tongue tie, that one.
Biomechanist. Do you know what? I've never actually thought on how to say that word before it actually tried to come out of my mouth.
Yeah.
So anyway, biomechanist. I'm going to have to really think about that one as we go through. But I'm glad we got the mispronunciation out of the way early. But it's great to have you on, Adam. So yeah, we might as well just dig in and get started. So I suppose the first question I really want to ask you is, with regards to being a biomechanist, I have absolutely no idea what biomechanics is in sports. And more to the point, how does somebody become a sports biomechanist?
They're very good questions, Rich. Let's start by, I guess, defining biomechanics. So it sounds more fancy than it really is. In some ways, I think people might think I'm working with robots and developing some fancy robots, but it's not. It's a scientific discipline which is focused on the study of human movement, essentially. So, we are ultimately applying mechanical principles, so grounded in physics, maths, those kind of laws of we know how things move, to our biological system. So, we think about the human body. We've got lots of biological components, which, are very different to mechanical components of mechanical systems. But we're trying to apply those mechanical principles to our biological system to understand how we move, the way we move, what causes those movements, and then kind of from a sports perspective, how we can use that knowledge to understand what can drive better performance, how we can understand how we learn skills, how we can reduce the likelihood of injury. And yeah, that's kind of where I think it lends itself into the sports domain. So it often gets kind of misconstrued, or potentially misconstrued, as the science of technique. But I think that's where it maybe gets a bit too close to the coaching context. I think coaches feel quite a lot of ownership over technique. And whilst movement and technique, you can argue it's kind of grounded in the same thing. Biomechanics is more about understanding those scientific mechanical principles that underpin the movement, that cause the movement, and allow us to understand how we control movement, essentially. So yeah, I guess performance enhancement and injury prevention are the two main themes within sports biomechanics, which we can probably talk about a little bit moving forwards. And I can talk a little bit more about my research areas and how potentially that connects to the BMX world as well. But biomechanics is one of those core disciplines, I suppose, in the sense we get to work with lots of kit and lots of cool sensors. So it's probably one of the sports science disciplines where, we use equipment that's developed in other disciplines. So when we do our motion capture studies, we're using kit that's developed in the animation world. A lot of people have seen the classic behind the scenes Lord of the Rings videos with people wearing the little marker dots on the body, and then that's tracked in kind of 3D space and then turned into animation. We benefit from that kit in our labs to understand how humans move in 3D space. So there's a lot of kind of sensor development and sensor validation and application of different sensors to the sporting context that we get to work with in biomechanics, which, I think I think is pretty cool at times.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to start with the first obvious question to me. How do you become a sports biomechanist? Nobody wakes up one day and goes, do you know what? I really want to work in sports biomechanics. Most kids want to be a policeman or a train driver or a professional footballer. Yeah. You became a sports mechanist. How did that happen?
Yeah, I completely forgot that part of the question because I just started to ramble on about what biomechanics
No, it's fine. It's fine. Keep going.
It's my journey into it was, I guess, pretty typical. I was always interested in sport. I've raced BMX since I was 11. I'm now 33, so many years, and I always quite liked science at school. So whether it was the wisest decision or not at the time, I thought that studying sports science would be a good idea, and I'm happy with where things have ended up. I studied sports science at the University of Bath. I started in 2009, and biomechanics was one of the core disciplines within that degree program. So the three core disciplines within sports science, typically an undergraduate study, would be physiology, biomechanics, and psychology. So they're the three core themes across the degree, which I studied as an undergrad. To be perfectly honest, when I was doing my undergrad, I was much more interested in physiology. I did a year's work placement in an exercise physiology centre over in Vancouver in Canada, which was absolutely fantastic for a year. And then came to the end of the degree, really enjoyed my dissertation research project. I think I've always been quite curious, quite systematic. So that kind of opportunity to undertake a year's research project at the end of my undergrad degree was something that I just super enjoyed. So then I was trying to look for PhD opportunities that would keep me in Bath, but at the time there wasn't kind of projects or funding. So an opportunity had come up over in Cardiff for a sports biomechanics PhD. But it was very applied, so it was an opportunity to work part-time with the Welsh Institute of Sport. So the Welsh version of what used to be the English Institute of Sport is now the UK Sports Institute, working as a biomechanist with them, but primarily focused on working with their S&C team. So I led essentially their testing and monitoring and force plate diagnostics for 4 or 5 years, which I really, really enjoyed. And then the PhD was kind of part-time in addition to that workload. And so, initially I declined the PhD offer because I was like, I'm not a biomechanist. I don't think I'm right for this. But when I boiled it back down to what my interests really lied in, which was applied sciences, actually working with athletes, seeing that impact from the research into performance, then, biomechanics is actually a really nice cross-discipline subjects that mirrors with S&C very well. So I think the applied nature really was ultimately what attracted me to it. And then spent a bit longer than I was funded for to finish the PhD, and then wrote a big document, defended it with a couple of big scientists in the field, and then all of a sudden you've got a PhD in sports biomechanics and you don't know what to do with it. So it's that's the way that I went. But a lot of people will also do an undergraduate study in whether it's sports science or mechanical engineering. Let's say there's a lot of leading academics in the biomechanics field that came from more of a mechanical background, let's say, rather than a sports background. And there are then a kind of not as many roles out there in terms of biomechanics compared to some of the other disciplines. I think still kind of your physiologist role, your S&C roles, your nutritionist, your psych roles are probably still more of those in the sports world than biomechanics jobs. But there are definitely roles out there, most of which will require some form of probably master's level at minimum study in biomechanics and some experience elsewhere. So it's whilst it sounds like a quite a foreign word and a unique discipline, it's quite embedded into the sports sciences, and a lot of clubs and institutes around the world will have some input from biomechanics into what they do. Okay.
Do you actually work full time then? Is that your actual job now?
Yeah,
biomechanist. Do you work for a specific organisation or club? How does that work for you now on a day-to-day basis?
So, Rich, I've never left school, mate. I'm an academic. I work as a lecturer at the University of Bath. So I kind of came full circle to where I started my academic study in 2009. And then, once I finished my PhD in Cardiff, I came back to the university to take on my lectureship role in 2018. So I've been, full-time working for the University of Bath since then and absolutely love it, to be honest. I've always enjoyed coaching. I've coached BMX for years as well, so I've always enjoyed that element of learning and seeing people develop. So the opportunity to teach in sports biomechanics now is wonderful, and to keep pursuing some aspects of research as well is what keeps us all interested and intrigued, and the excitement rolling on to the next academic year.
Right. Wow, I didn't know you were actually you were lecturing. I had this idea in my mind that you actually work for some form of sports organisation or something like that. So it's really interesting to find out that you have kind of taken your knowledge and then you're kind of pushing it back to the up and coming sports biomechanists. So that's fantastic. One thing that you did touch on that did catch my kind of ear was you were on about biomechanics in relation to strength and conditioning. Obviously, we had Connor Hedges on not too many episodes ago. I'm just wondering how biomechanics relates to strength and conditioning and how the two sit together. And does it inform things like exercise selection? Does it inform specificity of training, that kind of stuff? How does it affect what a BMX athlete does in terms of strength and conditioning?
Yeah, I think S&C is one of those, it is where a lot of my research is based, so I'm probably biased. It's one of those fascinating disciplines that draws in many of the kind of core sciences. If we think about what I mentioned earlier, like ultimately, if we're trying to drive physiological adaptation, we need some form of mechanical stimulus to achieve that, right? So the biomechanics aspect is inherently linked with the physiological adaptations that we're trying to achieve. And then if we bring it out to the even broader context of S&C and have the coaching element, then there's a lot of the psychology that feeds into that and how we coach and how we ask athletes to perform these lifts when we're doing our S&C sessions. But I think the biomechanics aspect is very much linked with, as you said, helping to inform exercise selection to ensure that the adaptations that we are trying to achieve from that training are as relevant as possible to the athlete that we're trying to develop. So I think the blend between biomechanics and physiology when it comes to planning strength training is kind of a match made in heaven, which is maybe what drew me to the PhD that I ended up doing, is because at the time I thought, it's a biomechanics PhD, but actually it ended up being a kind of S&C focused PhD with biomechanical input. So I think it's a wonderful application of biomechanics is the S&C realm. And if we think about the basics of how we drive adaptation, we need some form of stimulus or exposure that is greater than what we're habitually used to. And the human body is very good at responding to that stimulus. There'll be some kind of alarm phase, you might get a bit fatigued, and then there'll be some compensation, which is where we really adapt. And if we're clever, then we'll prevent ourselves from overtraining, and we can just keep rolling that through in a very simplistic way. So that's kind of linked to the principle of overload. We need to stress the system a bit to drive the adaptation if we're seeking a higher level of performance. And then the other principle that I think lends nicely into the biomechanics realm is, as you said, it's that specificity aspect. And this is where I think there's a super interesting conversation to be had. And it would be great to do a follow-up at some point with Connor or even with other S&C practitioners. I know Nate Parsons still works with a bunch of BMX athletes as well. It'd be really good to have a conversation about what is specificity of training, because I think historically specificity is inherently embedded within adaptation. I think that the classic definition is adaptations are specific to the nature of the training stress, meaning that there needs to be a training stress, and depending on what stress we throw at the system, it will adapt specific to the stress that it's been exposed to. So a nice example of that would be if we trained on a knee extension machine and we only trained between 40 and 60 degrees of knee flexion. So kind of small 20-degree range of motion knee extensions. Then we'll get very strong in that joint angle range. We might get a little bit of kind of crossover into neighboring joint angles, but we're going to get very strong within that range of motion. That's known, that happens, and we see it as well with velocity as well. If we always train at kind of higher speeds, then we'll get better at applying force at higher speeds. If we always train at slower speeds, then we'll get better at generating force at slower speeds, more so than we do the others. So that specificity of training is grounded in a lot of evidence. But I think what has happened over time, and from speaking to lots of coaches during my PhD, is that specificity and replication have got a bit confused. And I think the idea of specificity has been taken towards, well, to be specific, we need to replicate the movement as best we can. And that should lead to the best training adaptation. But if that was the case and we're defining specificity by its level of replication to the sport, then we would just ride our bikes. We would just sprint. If we were sprinters, we wouldn't need to use the tools that an S&C practitioner has to train, because we would just do the sport. We need to recognize that there's other methods to exist. We need to try and drive some adaptation. And I think biomechanics that's the really important aspect, is it helps to guide us into those exercises that still allow us to achieve that adaptation, but just in potentially a slightly better way that's geared for our sport. So, sorry, I am waffling a lot, so please do butt in.
No, honestly, it's fascinating. I'm just sitting here listening. It's great. Keep going.
So, yeah, we want adaptations to be transferable to the task. And I think, most S&C practitioners are always curious and thinking about the adaptations. And I think the biomechanics aspect, or the way I termed it in my thesis, was kind of biomechanically informed exercise selection. It's just helping to make those final decisions. There's so many exercises we can choose from if it comes to developing strength or power, or Connor spoke about ballistic jumps as well. But that biomechanics knowledge can just help us be a bit more informed about which one we choose. So I'll give just a few examples from the literature out there and work we've done, that if we're doing deadlifts, so we've got a couple of options. We can use a straight bar, a normal barbell, and lift it off the floor, or I guess they've been around for a little while, but more recently, the hexagonal bars, or the track bars, depending on what you call them, have been introduced. And you can do the same kind of thing. You can pick up a weight from the floor. And if we look at comparable loads and comparable relative loads, typically that straight bar, so the classic barbell deadlift, will put greater demand on the hip extensors than it will the knee extensors to achieve the task. Whereas the hex bar, so standing in the middle of the frame, tends to focus more so, or place the focus more so, on the knee extensors than the hip extensors. So if we're trying to program deadlifts and we want to focus more so on the knee extensors rather than the hip extensors, then you go for the hex bar over the straight bar, and vice versa. So, and that, whilst you can get potentially, good coach's eye would be able to infer that, actually having the evidence from the biomechanics work that we can do to understand how much torque is being generated around the hip joint, around the knee joint to perform that task, it just helps to solidify, I guess, that recommendation. And then if we were going to go to something a bit more explosive or ballistic, again, we can do jump squats with a barbell across the back. Or we can do jump squats. I think I saw on Ross's story earlier today, he's doing some jumps inside the hex bar. So starting from the deadlift position and then holding the bar at the side, jumping up in the air. And again, research has shown that at lighter loads, so kind of about nothing more than 20% of 1 rep max, the hex bar seems to be advantageous for outcomes such as jump heights, peak force, peak power, maximum velocities, and a maximum rate of force development. So if you're trying to train your ballistic jumps at lower levels of intensity, hex bar might be a better tool to use. And then, if we're thinking about that kind of jump squat training more generally, we know we can manipulate the load to focus on a particular part of our force-velocity relationship. But it's really interesting to see how things at the joint level then change when we manipulate the load. So again, coming back to jump squats, because it's probably the most commonly used tool for ballistic training, at a system level, so kind of combined whole body level, we tend to see the highest power outputs between 0 and 20% 1RM, so quite light loads, probably more so towards the 0. And coincidentally, that's when we get the highest power outputs around the knee joint. So if we're wanting to train knee extensor power output, there's no reason to go above 20% of 1RM, because the power output at the knee is going to start to decline. However, on the flip side to that, we don't get to peak hip power outputs until 40 to 60% of 1RM. So depending on what you're trying to achieve, then that might dictate what load you place on your barbell to do your jump squats. The ankle stays consistent in jump squats up to about 90% 1RM. That doesn't really change too much. So yeah, I guess there's just a few examples from the literature, I suppose, as to how that extra biomechanics insight, when we measure things like forces, and especially at that joint level, the torques generated about those joints to turn the segments, we can really start to be a bit more informed with our exercise selection. Okay.
So with regards, I'm just trying to break that down in my own head to how, like, your average BMX athlete might want to use that. So if they're working in conjunction with their strength and conditioning coach and they want to, improve, did you say knee flexion power? Was that correct?
Knee extensor power. Knee
extensor power. So they would actually have to have their program slightly differently to kind of grow that area of their training, rather than if they were looking to improve hip extensor power. I think we're probably going like way deeper than your normal average BMXer would do. But the point I was trying to get to was the fact that you can actually break it down to such a level where you can change different elements of your training to change different elements of your power. And I think that is quite a fascinating thing to do, that you can get to that level to make different adaptations as you go along. So from a biomechanical standpoint, is there kind of, for an average BMXer, is there a selection of exercises that you would probably say are better suited to better biomechanically suited to, like, a younger rider or an older rider? How would that look for somebody who's kind of training on a 2 to 3 week basis, just your average BMXer?
That's a really good question. If we knew the answers to that, Rich, we'd all be very successful. I think, those examples that I've just spoken through, and where I think biomechanics can help in the S&C realm, I guess is at that point where you've probably got somebody that's already exposed to S&C and has kind of gone through their development, very proficient in various lifts, and now we're trying to really fine tune that program to get the biggest bang for the buck. If you I think in terms of a kind of younger BMX athlete that's stepping into the gym for the first time, I think there are some elements of biomechanics that can help inform safety, and that's probably most important at that age. And I think it links to nicely what Connor said. Ultimately, they just need to have fun. And novice athletes or people that aren't exposed to something are going to start to adapt just because it's novel. So as long as it is focused, or the exercises you choose have some element of that triple extension, or at least hip and knee extension in the exercise, then it's going to have some level of transfer across to the sport. And that could be your squats, that could be back or front squat, depending on what your preference is. That could be leg press. If you've got issues as you get older with potentially your back, or you don't want to load your back so much, then maybe the hex bar over the straight bar deadlift is a better way to go. For example, I mean, this is, it would be so nice to do some more research with BMX athletes and actually look at those characteristics in the gym movements and the technical or the movement patterns in let's say the gate start or acceleration down the hill in BMX, to really build that better picture as to what those movements look like, because that information just doesn't exist for BMX, unfortunately. So I think it's hard to provide a kind of XYZ of exercises that are going to work for novice versus your older athletes. But I think the more that the field grows and the more that biomechanics can input to S&C, then it might be that we get to a point where it's just very common knowledge that this variation of this lift and this variation of this lift are more appropriate for your BMX cyclist versus your track cyclist, which is predominantly seated, versus your, some other sport. No, I think it's maybe not the answer people want to hear in terms of there's no definite outcomes, but it's probably the best answer I can give without saying something that I'll regret later down the line. Like everyone always jokes because I just love a Bulgarian split squat, and I'll just do those for days and days and days. But there's no evidence to suggest that's better than doing just a back squat if that's your thing.
Yeah, well, sometimes you've just got to do with what actually suits you, I suppose. If all the evidence says do a back squat, but you absolutely hate doing them, and you can get the same effect from doing a Bulgarian split squat, then and it makes you happy. Just do what makes you happy. Do you know what I mean? It's it's because let's face it, 99.9% of us are not going to the Olympics, so it's not really going to matter. But yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the other questions I wanted to ask was, in terms of like the biomechanics of a BMX athlete, is there a body type that kind of responds better? Biomechanically speaking, would you say like somebody who's maybe like, I don't know, a particular height or a particular build or has a particular physical characteristic, are they more biomechanically suited to BMX than others? Have we got to that stage where we can actually tell?
I think we could anecdotally talk about it, and I think coaches would at this point probably be better positioned than the researchers to talk about it, because the studies the research isn't there. But what would be really, really interesting to know is, for a given athlete of different stature, muscle mass, those sorts of things, what does their optimal look like, or what should their technique look like to maximize their individual performance? And unfortunately, that just requires a lot of data. So, for example, I talk about running just as an example, but a recent PhD student at Bath has just finished, and they did, I think, over 100 participants, and then use some machine learning models, which is way beyond my brain space anyway, to look at characteristics of running styles and also to see how they responded to fatigue based on their running style. And I think something like that would be really awesome for BMX, if we could get a big enough sample and we could know if you're kind of this height, this kind of physical characteristic, here's kind of what we could, this would be a recommendation for your technical development of how to do your gait style, or how to be in the most efficient sprint position. We kind of know roughly what that should look like. But as you say, someone who's taller with long legs like me is probably going to be better suited to a deep manual than someone with shorter legs. And we don't necessarily need any research to confirm that. But it would be really interesting to know what, how we could work with those individuals to get the best out of them, for certain characteristics that you just can't change. Someone who's 5'6" is never going to become 6'4", and it would be nice to get to a position where we can make some stronger recommendations for those different athletes. But yeah, I think anecdotally we can say that BMX is one of those wonderful sports where for every tall person you get that's super fast, there's probably a shorter person that's also super fast and has skill sets in other areas. And that's the joy of our sport, isn't it? We've got the raw acceleration down the hill, and then we've got a lot of strategy and technical ability around the track. So it's that just frustratingly muddies the picture a lot when you're trying to think about any studies in the area.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Maurice Stromberg's versus Donnie Robinson. That was the first thing that actually sprung to mind. 6 foot plus versus 5'5" or whatever he was Donnie Robinson. So yeah, there's so many variables that we could kind of look at. But moving on with the biomechanical stuff, are there any specific tools that you have used to help BMX athletes develop, yourself or anybody else?
Great question. I mean, yeah, frustratingly, I've got a huge passion for BMX. I still race. Like, I love the sport, but I would just love to be able to do more in that space. But unfortunately, things like funding and, if Bloomy's listening or anyone else out there wants to start commissioning some biomechanics research to the squad, then get in touch. But frustratingly, it's just an area where there's not much research that has been done. But I suppose I can talk about some tools where it would be really useful, and I think the industry is turning towards more efficient methods that would hopefully allow that in the future. So I guess some of the more common tools that we use in the area of biomechanics would be motion capture. So we have different levels of motion capture systems that allow us to understand or measure the movement, whether that's standard video cameras, and that can range from those on your phone to those that would sit on a tripod. And then we've got our sophisticated 3D motion capture systems, like the ones that are used in the animation space, where we create a nice capture volume around the task, place markers on the athlete, and that's probably still the gold standard for collecting movement data. And it provides us a really detailed 3D view of how every segment of the body is moving in real time. And then we've got other systems that are designed to measure force. So whether that's force plates embedded into the ground or other force sensors that allow us to measure the force applied in different conditions. So, for example, in BMX, it would be really nice if a company devoted some more time to instrumented pedals. They exist in other disciplines of cycling, but we don't yet have a BMX compatible system that would give us the quality of data that we need, but that would be super interesting. And then other tools that we typically use in the lab would be electromyography. So looking at the actual activation of the muscles themselves. So if we put the full biomechanics package together of a gate start, let's say, we'd have a 3D motion capture system around the gate and the hill. We'd have markers on the athlete. We'd have EMG sensors to look at the timing and magnitude of when the muscles are being stimulated. And we might have some extra sensors on the bike to see what's going on there. And that would be a dream scenario to really dig into what does BMX gate starts acceleration performance look like from a biomechanical standpoint. I think some of the areas that would be really interesting to look at, and it is just a bit challenging to do, would be just stripping it back to those motion capture studies. Actually, we don't really have much evidence or much research out there about the movement patterns involved in BMX to a really detailed level. We can understand and appreciate what a good start looks like, or what typically happens. Head and shoulders move forward, and we start to extend the leg. But actually being able to quantify that at a kind of deeper level would be really useful for the area. I guess the challenges that we've got is that the less invasive 2D video analysis systems can be much more time consuming on the back end. If you're manually digitizing that motion, there can be some issues with the accuracy. But then on the flip side, kind of more gold standard 3D motion capture systems are not great in the field. Think about a BMX athlete going off an 8-meter hill. Typically, we have to ask athletes to take pretty much all their clothes off, put markers on the skin so we don't get movement of the clothes affecting the measurement of that marker. We're not going to get Quillan going off the 8-meter hill and a set of skins hitting the first jump. So we get some real difficulties there. The good news is that there are becoming some better systems for markerless motion capture now. So using things like AI and machine learning models to be able to just have kind of a normal setup of cameras. So I don't know, 8 to 10 normal video cameras, and we can train models to be very accurate at tracking that athlete and the bike through that field of view. And I think that could be really useful for the BMX world. If we can actually just set a camera system up around the gate and the hill, we don't have to put any markers on the athlete, but we can track them in 3D space coming out the gate and down the hill, then that's going to be an absolute game changer for coaching feedback, for technical understanding, for understanding how riders evolve over time. So that's kind of where I'm hoping in a few more years some of those systems are going to come a little bit more to the forefront. And then I guess one of the other ones is the pedal sensor. So we know from well, if we just think about cycling, it's not just about how much force we can put into the pedal. There's a component of that force that we push into the crank that acts perpendicular to the crank that's actually going to turn the crank. So there is a bit of a technical or an efficiency point of view when it comes to putting force into a pedal. And this partly might describe why someone that just gets a lot stronger doesn't necessarily come out of the gate faster. Because if you push into the crank or the pedal really hard, but some of that force is not orientated perpendicular to actually turn the crank, then it's kind of wasted force. And it's the same in sprinting. You know, there's lots of evidence to suggest that it's not just about how hard you push into the ground when you hit the ground, it's how effective you are at orientating those forces in the running direction, so forwards, that's going to determine your acceleration, which makes sense. If you want to run forwards, the force that you apply needs to push you in that direction. So you want to, increase that effective component of the force. And I think
I was just going to say, so it's not just the strength that you have, it's how you generate it to actually give you that forward movement. So that could apply to a BMXer as equally as it could apply to a 100-meter sprinter.
Absolutely. And I guess we're a bit more constrained in the sense that our foot's attached to a pedal, which is attached to an axle onto the crank. But still, when we push into the crank, some of the force isn't orientated in that effective direction that's going to drive the crank. And this is where, my brain starts turning at times. And I think, well, because part of my PhD was also in sprinting, and block starts in sprinting. And the popular thing around in that area is around ankle stiffness. So if you're sprinting and you hit the ground and your ankle caves and your heel drops, then what's happening to the force vector, which is imagine there's a big line that comes out of the ground that shows how much force is going you've applied. It's going to start moving it away from the direction you want it to. If your ankle caves and the heel drops, it's going to make the force a little bit more vertical rather than keep it pushing forwards. And it kind of makes me think sometimes around in BMX, like how often are people training their ankle structures? Do we actually need a stiff ankle? Do we need it to be somewhat flexible to adapt to the position of the crank we're at? Because if you just think about it in a very similar way, if you're at a completely perpendicular crank level, so 3 and 9 o'clock, and you push really hard from your hip extensors and your knee down, and your heel just drops, well, then a lot of that force is going to push kind of forwards outside of or towards the front of the bike rather than straight down onto the crank in that perpendicular direction. So it would be an area that I'd love to speak to more people about, just to, especially guys like Marcus and some of the S&Cs at British Cycling or otherwise, and just ask what they do around that ankle component, because it's the last linkage in the system before it contacts the bit that turns the mechanics, the bike, right?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting part, and at least for sprinting, it's been shown quite consistently that having a stiff ankle structure that resists the forces that are applied by the other parts of the system is really helpful for overground sprinting. I kind of always curious about what that looks like for cycling. Yeah.
And bizarrely enough, there's been a lot of, talk about, the French gear systems and that kind of stuff and technological advancement of the bike, when maybe something like looking at ankle stiffness, ankle structure, ankle movement could give those extra few percent, I suppose, that an athlete could be looking for. And, everybody's got an ankle who rides BMX. Yeah. So it's an area that could be, definitely explored. So, if Bloomy or anybody else down at British Cycling is listening, then let's, have a chat with Adam. Let's see what we can get out of it. It might not be, a multi-geared bike. It might be a bit of ankle surgery that's required, or, putting a few titanium plates in there. I'm joking, obviously. But it's an area that, most people would not think to look at. But I honestly don't think that area would be kind of as thought of if you didn't have somebody like you who has an interest in both biomechanics and BMX, who's got a brain that just goes, well, that's an area we haven't explored. Why can't we do that? So having you in the sport to do that, Adam, I think is a phenomenal thing.
And there comes some kind of little passion projects, let's say, that would be great to know. So for a little while now, I've been thinking, I know why, because it would be difficult to do, but I wish there was a way we could just put a sensor on the front of the bike and get a continuous acceleration profile of that lap. So we would know exactly where we're generating speed, where we're losing speed. Looking like someone like Kai, how is it that he has just insane track speed? What is he doing on the takeoff of the jumps? What's he doing on the landing of the jumps? What's he doing round the corner that is actually allowing him to accelerate or minimize the deceleration? And I just think that would be so useful if that could feed into, the stuff that you guys can comment on in commentary, or we could have that playback of acceleration profiles of that, that second straight where someone does an amazing pass, or what did that look like? Where did they gain that speed? I think that would just be so awesome. The tricky bit is it's not the accelerometer sensor necessarily on the bike that's the issue. It's calibrating that in space to know exactly where on the track it is at any given point in time. But smarter people than me, I like to think, would be able to figure that out. And I just think it would be so cool. And then the other bit of biomechanics, I guess I didn't touch on. I'm just getting passionate now, so apologies for rambling again.
No, keep going. Honestly, loving it. Keep going.
We can move into kind of the what if scenario plays by doing some musculoskeletal modeling. So we can collect some data, some real data, some of the motion capture, the forces, the EMGs as well, if you want to. And you can build almost like a mathematical model of that movement. So let's just say the gate start again. And then when you've got your model and it's validated so that it can just essentially replicate what the real experimental data showed, then you can start playing around with stuff, right? So what if I increase the torque output or the strength of my hip extensors? What if I minimize my ankle range of motion from this to this? What happens if I move my shoulders this much more forwards during this part of the movement? And in some ways, it's not very externally valid, because you could end up with a gate start that is just not humanly possible, but the model would suggest that's the best way of doing it. But it is really a cool way of doing the kind of what if scenario testing to just get some ideas, I guess, of what would be, you can constrain the model to human norms. But yeah, that would probably be one of the more sophisticated aspects of biomechanics that we can do in the field that I thought would just be worth mentioning.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like biomechanics meets F1 telemetry. Do you know what I mean? To kind of get that. I mean, the thing that excited me from what you said in the last couple of minutes was the bit about, being able to work out where somebody like Kai White would generate his speed on the third and fourth straight, because he's absolutely famous for that kind of stuff, especially in the BMX realm. And we all go, yeah, you don't want Kai behind you going down the third straight when it's a bit of a rhythm section, because he generates all that speed off those jumps, and nobody knows how he does it. But be able to go, there's the evidence that tells you how he's doing it, where he's doing it. That would just be like mind-blowing. That would be mega. I would be all over that as a commentator all day long and twice on a Sunday. That's the kind of thing that my commentary dreams are made of.
Yeah, and it's not just about the elite performance, right? If that was a system that was embedded in other tracks, then as a youth athlete, as someone like myself who's still trying to, maybe I'm not trying to get any faster anymore, but I'm trying to prevent getting slower as I get older. Just having that feedback to yourself. Okay, on this part of the track, this is where I'm losing speed. This is where I'm gaining speed. These are my strength areas. This is where I need to improve. Like, it would just be a really good tool to have for development of track speed, let's say, kind of full stop.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you've mentioned actually your racing, because I wanted to dip into that side of it as well, because obviously your profession, your knowledge and everything else, and you racing at the level that you've raced over the years, racing Masters and that kind of stuff at World Championship level. How has your knowledge helped you and your racing performance?
Oh, that's a really good question, because I'm probably one of the worst people for not doing what I know is probably best to an extent. I think I get quite carried away in trying new things because my mind just constantly wants to keep thinking forwards. But I guess what it has allowed me to do is just get really interested in training and really excited by training. And I think that's in some ways the key for longevity in a sport like BMX. If you're never going to make it at an elite level, you've got to love the process of making yourself better. Like fundamentally, if you enjoy that, then you'll stay in the sport probably for a long time, because it's fun preparing for races. It's fun doing the races themselves. I guess some of the biomechanics knowledge that I've gained in the S&C realm has informed my training in that respect over the last few years, or probably from kind of my mid-20s onwards. I think my appreciation of the strength training side of things has changed, and different ways of trying to get those adaptations, like I spoke about before, has helped. It just helped keep things fresh as well, and just help to get excited about training, because I want to try this new block and see how it works. And I think just being surrounded by a professional sports institute when I was doing my PhD really, really helped, because I could talk to the physiologist about something, I could talk to nutrition, I could talk to like loads of people just in that sports science environment, that I think just really helped my overall approach to training and racing. And I think it shows that I had probably my best years in BMX towards my late 20s, early 30s, off the back of exposure to kind of working, not being an elite athlete, but working in a professional sport setting. So there must have been something in that probably that helped me to gain a kind of second wind in my mid to late 20s, and eventually make some world finals, and at Glasgow last year make the Masters final, and just still I guess get some results and some success, even though it's never been at an elite level. Yeah, so I've got to ask the question then, how was it in that World Masters final? Oh, mate, I absolutely blew my gate. And let's be honest, I was never getting to the bottom of the hill first anyway. I loved that race day at Glasgow. I think because they'd come out of like UK elite superclass a few years ago, and I've been racing, 19 to 29 now for a good few years. I guess, in that class, in the build up to Glasgow and in previous years, I would kind of always be close to the front, close to getting whole shots in finals and kind of riding from the front. And then all of a sudden I'm thrown into a class where, there's genuine ex-pro athletes that I've looked up to for many years, have just got really fast starts. And so it was a completely different race day for me. I'm not really known for kind of my track craft or making moves in corners, but my track speed is pretty good. And on a track like Glasgow, wide open, third straight is just absolutely made for my long legs. I was just absolutely loving trying to pass people. And I don't think I finished every lap in a better position than I exited the first corner. Managed to get through the semi. I think in the semi, Kyle and me were 1, 2, 3, and then just walking up to the gate in the final, I don't know, I didn't feel crazy nervous. I didn't feel too relaxed. I was just excited, and then as that gate dropped, my front wheel just popped up and went into a bit of a wheelie, and then kind of just settled in. And it's frustrating then, isn't it? Because whilst I'm over the moon getting sixth in Masters that year, you still just can't stop thinking about the what ifs. What if I didn't completely blow the gate, or what if I was just able to squeeze into that gap and not get too slowed up in that part of the track. But amazing experience. Glasgow as a track was just amazing for a world champs, and I don't know if I will put myself back in Masters again. I kind of feel like I wanted to tick it off the list. I'm really happy with how it went, but it's a lot. There's some guys in there that are, still putting in a lot of training time, and now being a new dad and having to readjust some priorities. I might not do a Masters again, but that's absolutely okay. And BMX is great because there's still opportunities to go to world champs, race competitively, and have lots of fun.
Yeah. I was in my mind, I'm going, come on, Adam, Copenhagen. He's got your name written all over it. Masters, get some graft done. Do a bit more biomechanical research, I don't think you could probably walk away from this sport being in it as long as you have, and obviously loving it as much as you loving it, without going, let's give it one more go.
Yeah, I think Worlds is definitely on the cards. It's an awesome way to travel. Let's be honest. Whether I choose to race Masters or not, I think it's something I'm just undecided about yet. We'll see how training goes. I'm fully motivated to get back into full training. It's been tricky since January with the baby to, justify training as much as I used to. So this has always been a bit of a year of just kind of, seeing how things go, doing what I can when I can. And next year, the motivation is still there, Rich.
Good. That's what I like to hear. That is definitely what I like to hear. Is there any advice that you would like? I mean, obviously, you've been in this sport for a long time, Adam, and you're over the age of 30, even though you don't look it, and you've still got all your own hair. Is there any advice that you would give to a Masters or above rider? Because a lot of my listeners are the cruiser guys, the BMX dads, the guys who are still getting out there on a regular basis. Is there any training advice that you would give them from a biomechanical standpoint where you could just go, right, lads, just give a little bit more focus to this and see where it takes you?
It sounds really, really simple, but ride your bike. You just especially, I've noticed it personally as I've got older, and I think I maybe made this mistake a little bit in the prep to Glasgow. Is I was still trying to, I guess, I prioritized trying to chase things in the gym a bit more than I should have, and I should have been focusing on riding my bike more. And it's difficult, right? Because sometimes when we get into the depths of winter, it's harder to get out to the track. It's easier to go into the gym and invest in physical development. But ride your bike, enjoy riding the bike. And I think, this is not biomechanics related, and I think it's just because I don't think that there's anything I can really say from a biomechanics point of view that would help keep older riders in the sport. You just need to be enjoying what you do, and whether that's finding someone to go and do sprints with, whether that's making sure when you go to the track you've got someone there that you can ride with. I think they're the most important things. I'm still in BMX probably 50% because of the friendships I've made along the way, and that's what still makes me want to get to the track and race with these people and spend my weekends with these people. Maybe less biomechanics-y, just ride your bike and try and find lots of enjoyment and social aspects of that time that you do ride the bike. I think as you get older, it arguably becomes just as important when you're young and you're trying to chase your mate or do what they're doing because they've jumped this and now you want to jump this. Yeah.
Right. Fantastic. Well, sometimes the most basic advice is sometimes the best. So that's brilliant.
Sorry, on the flip side of that, I'm more than happy to chat with anybody at any point about some aspects of their training that might be more specifically linked to biomechanics. Like if someone in the cruiser classes wants to come up and talk to me about their current gym program or how they're setting up their block sprint, then just come and chat to me. But I think, for general advice, it's keep riding the bike, keep enjoying riding the bike.
Yeah, you might have opened yourself a can of worms there. There might be a queue of cruiser guys wanting to talk to you, but I'm sure they'll get all the information that they actually need. All right, Rich and Adam from the future here. We discovered just after we'd finished recording that there was a certain little part of it that we actually missed just with regards to training tips for the older riders. Adam wanted to add a few more extra things in. So, we don't like to disappoint anybody, guests or listeners. So, Adam, we were talking about biomechanical training tips for older cruiser riders. I'm going to hand the floor over to you. Just let me know what you wanted to add.
Thanks, Rich. And this is just as hilarious because anyone who knows me really well will just think this is just so Adam. I just can't leave things if they're still on my brain. I think when we spoke about it first, all I said was enjoy riding the bike, which is obviously important, don't get me wrong, but I feel like I'm selling everybody short unless I actually gave some training advice. So, I think there are a handful of things, and they're not all biomechanical, but I think they are kind of science grounded, some of them. That I think that not just the older cruiser rider, but the riders kind of like myself that have had to prioritize training over full-time work and still trying to push on to be as fast as possible. And I think some of them even apply down to those kind of teenage riders that are just at the point of maybe starting to properly train and are thinking kind of what do I prioritize. So I think I've got a few key points that people might find useful. So I think the first one, this maybe leans into more the older rider, is more does not equal better. More time invested to training to a certain point is good, but beyond that, you're just going to get tired and fatigued. So from the start, I think just understand that more training doesn't always mean that you're going to get a better outcome. Intention and direction really, really matter. I think it's really important that you can be honest with yourself, know the areas that you need to improve, and then try and be as efficient as possible reaching those goals. Everyone's trying to balance extra things outside of BMX training when you get to a certain age. So efficiency really does matter. And I guess that does also lean into the younger rider too. Whilst it's nice to be able to train, you don't want to be spending 4 hours on a session that you could get the same outcome in 2. I think part of that is to try and have a plan and have some structure, whether that's with a coach or with an online coach or yourself. Just kind of spend some time thinking about how that week's going to look. And so when you get to the track or when you get to the gym, or if you're going out for sprints, you're not arriving and thinking, what am I going to do today? I'll try this, this and this. Try and have some time to think of the plan beforehand and have some structure. Again, life gets really busy when you're older, so you want to maximize all of the time that you have to train and really make it count. I think, again, as I've noticed over the last couple of years, when you get a little bit older, prioritize your rest and recovery. It definitely becomes more important. I can definitely not handle the same amount of training volume that I used to, and I think I've now started to appreciate that rest and recovery a bit more, and think of it as part of the training plan and training process as well as the sessions themselves. And then I think there are a couple more kind of biomechanics-y ones that I think have got some good transferability. So one of them is, do we need to go super heavy in the gym? And whilst sometimes it can be nice, and it's nice to see that your maximum strength can be pushed higher. You can add 20 kilos to your max squat, for example. For BMX, I'd question whether we really need to do that often or if at all. There's some good evidence to suggest that intention to move as fast as possible, regardless of the load, is probably more important than lifting heavy loads themselves, especially when it comes to improvements in rate of force development. And I think it's something that maybe you touched on with Connor as well. But when we've got time constraints on force application, which we have in BMX, we're hitting nearly 200 RPM after a few cranks. And so we haven't got that much time to apply force. And generating our maximum force does take a few seconds, which we don't have in BMX. So it's probably more important that we can capitalize on a certain level, or as much as possible, of that sub-maximum force as we can in that short time frame. So if we increase our rate of force development and we can apply more force in that short time frame, even if it's nowhere near our maximum capability, then we're going to be faster. We're going to apply more force in that time. And so actually taking some of the weights back and not going super heavy, and then having 3 days where you feel absolutely shot because you've done something really heavy, especially as you get older, you might be able to drop that weight a little bit, but have the focus on trying to move that weight as fast as possible, and definitely get better gains in rate of force development, and probably not suffer too much on the hypertrophy or the strength improvements as well. And so that's something that I've prioritized a lot over the last few years, and I've planned for some of the riders that I coach as well. And I think it comes back into that rest, recovery, balancing fatigue when you get older is, if you do a really heavy gym session, it can pop you down for a few days, and that impacts the sprints, that impacts the track time, because you're just feeling super sore. So one piece of, I think, biomechanical advice could be start thinking about, do you need to go that heavy, or can you get just as much benefit or more benefit out of keeping it lighter, but really trying to move that weight fast as possible? It doesn't mean you have to go super light and explode off the ground. You could be kind of 70-80% of 1 RM, but just trying to move it as quickly as possible.
Okay, because I said to Connor as well when we were speaking that, especially for the older guys, it's more about having enough gas in the tank at the end of the day and being able to actually produce a decent lap in your semi and your final rather than doing 2 motors and being absolutely done.
Yeah. And that is hugely important. I guess that last piece of advice comes more so probably from a acceleration out of the gate point of view than a full lap perspective. And I guess my earlier answer to the question of just enjoy riding your bike and have loads of fun. I mean, that's the only way I do my cardio work. Let's be honest. I ride the bike as a way of trying to make sure I can still do laps at for semi and final time. And then something else I guess I wanted to say that I had forgot was the importance of a rock solid core. And I think this translates again across any age, but especially as we get older as well. We want to try and remove as many weak parts of the chain as possible. And so, when we are putting maximum force, maximum power into the cranks as we come down the start hill, if we've got a really, really weak core, we're going to experience some loss of that force and that energy transfer. And what you are able to put onto the pedals is going to be compromised. And I think, for any level, but especially as you get older as well, dropping some of the sets on the heavy squats and putting in 10 to 15 minutes more core work in your programs, probably going to be more helpful. And we're not just talking lots of, sit-ups and ab work to get, a nice chiseled 6-pack. I've wished for years that I could have one of those. It's more that core work that resists deformation. So when we're stressing the core, when we're applying as much force onto the cranks as possible, those exercises that try and prevent deformation of holding good positions is really, really important for being fast on the BMX. And then I think coming back to what I said last time, the importance of enjoying riding a bike is really important, especially as you get older, and appreciating that learning happens at all ages. It's normal to fluctuate between sessions where you feel really good and you feel progress is being made, and then sessions where you feel like progress isn't being made. That is absolutely normal. And it comes back to something that we'll speak about on the podcast too, around that variability side of things. Just enjoy the process, enjoy the fact that you're still trying to progress and learn to be better, whether you're 12, 18, 28 or 38, and just really be invested and enjoy that whole process. Okay,
cool. Adam from the future, this is Rich from the future. Thank you very much for adding those bits in for us. And now back to our regularly scheduled program. Just before we wrap this up, Adam, just let everybody know where they can find you on social media and that kind of stuff, and how they might want to get in touch.
Rich, I'm the worst social media person. Gary always gets frustrated at me because I don't really post, but my Instagram is AdamBrazil487. So you can find me through that. It's probably the best way these days if you haven't got my contact details, or just come and find me at the track sometime. It's probably the best way.
Awesome. I think that's a perfect place to wrap it up. So, Adam Brazil, biomechanist, PhD, but above all, kick-ass BMX guy. Thank you very much for coming on the BMX Commentator Podcast. I have no doubt that I'll get a flood of questions after this, and we may end up with a part 2 at some point. And like you said before, if we can get me, you and Connor on the same one and we can discuss some topics on that would be even better. So I'm sure we might be able to work that one out for a future episode if you're up for it.
Sounds good. I mean, there was one thing that I wanted to talk about today that we haven't had time to do, which was...
No. Honestly, fire away. Let's go. If you've got something on your mind, let's hear it. Go, fire away.
This is a super, super, super interesting aspect of biomechanics that I think has application to the novice, the learning, and the elite level. And it's around the area of variability. So more recently, kind of a theory called dynamical systems theory has come into play in sports biomechanics more, and it's really interesting. And it kind of views that variability in sports performance as a really functional aspect. So traditionally, you would think that elite athletes are consistent; they deliver the same thing again and again and again, and that's what makes them really good. but there's a difference between the outcome and then the input or the movement that gets to that outcome. So someone doing a gate start might be able to eventually reach the same position of the head, shoulders, front wheel as where it is in relation to the gate. But the way in which they get to that point might be very different every time. Or for example, if you wrote your signature 100 times and then overlaid them on each one, it's never going to be exactly the same. It'll be close, but it's not going to be exactly the same. And I think this is a really interesting area that could apply to BMX quite well. So we've got this very complex system as the human body, right? We've got more solutions than we have problems. Pedaling a bike is a solution. We can do that in many ways. Reaching over to grab your glass of water on the side is one solution, but you can achieve that in many different ways of moving your arm around, right? And so we have this thing called redundancy in our degrees of freedom. We've got so many parts of our body, so many muscles, motor units that activate those muscles, joint segments. The way we move is super complex, and we've got more solutions than we have problems. And the key thing when it comes to kind of task performance is to reduce that those degrees of freedom into something that's functional and something that allows us to perform the skill. And so there's this really nice model when it comes to movement variability. So the variation in how our structures and components interact with each other. So coordinating that movement, coordinating how the different parts of the body move together to achieve the outcome. There is natural variation in the way that happens. Okay. And a nice U-shaped model that's been kind of proven in some sporting realms, but in other motor learning realms, that says that when we learn a new skill, we're super, super variable. So the coordination patterns that we exhibit, we have high variability. We don't do the same thing time and time again. We're learning the skill. We're trying to figure out the solutions to what it is we're trying to achieve. And the parts of this theory as well kind of link into constraints. So we've got the constraints of the task itself. What are we trying to achieve? We've got our own organism constraints, so our physical capabilities, our stature, anthropometrics, like we mentioned earlier, and then the environment we're trying to perform them in. And all of these things are interacting together to help us find the solution to the problem. So when we're learning a skill for the first time or very novice, variability is really high. And then we have this kind of reduction. So we start the first part of our U shape. And when we then get somewhat proficient in a skill, we've got to a point where we reduce our degrees of freedom so much that we've kind of frozen them, and we're actually quite good at replicating things again and again and again. But then there's a limit to being in that space and then having the flexibility to adapt to what we call perturbations or things that can go wrong, let's say. So at the very elite level, what we see again is this opening of the degrees of freedom and higher variability. So consistent outcomes, so you'll still be able to get to the hill in X amount of seconds, time and time again. But the coordination variability, what's going on behind the scenes to achieve that, can open up and become more variable. And so that affords that elite athlete to adapt to changing environments in a race. So let's say you've come out of the corner slightly further to the right than the left, the takeoff of the jump is a bit different. If you don't have that variability in your coordination, the way you move on the bike, then your outcome is going to be vastly different because the constraints have changed, the task has changed, because that part of the takeoff is a little bit different. So at the novice level, this variability is really good for exploring how to do something. And so for kids, just get out there and try stuff and have fun. Ride your bikes at different parts of the track. All of that stuff that Connor was saying about just be free, jump around. All of that stuff is actually linked very nicely to this model. And then at the elite end, again, it's maybe thinking about not just trying to execute again and again and again in the same way, but how can we capitalize on making the environment a little bit different? Or can we, set some cones up so you enter the corner in a different way? Or, another example, if you go a little bit late on the gate and then you're kind of, the psychology kicks in of, I've missed the gate, that's probably going to affect the way you move. But if you're able to adapt to it and you've got this more flexible system, then it can be very good at then maintaining the rest of your performance. So yeah, I think I'd happily have another hour's conversation about the application of that into training and S&C. But I wanted to mention it because it's super fascinating that actually, when we look at elite athletes, we think they're just a bit more robotic. They do the same thing again and again and again, but it's probably that behind the scenes, they've got a lot of functional variability that allows them to keep on track and keep doing what they do very well.
Yeah. So it's like having that, what do they call it? Is it something about unconscious competence? And then you get to a certain point where you can do it again and again and again. But to make those changes to get to the next level, you need to have that ability to be very, very flexible at a very small aspect of what you do. Is that right? Yeah, we need variability to kind of unlock another state of coordination, another way of doing things. So once you've kind of got, like you said, got an appreciation and you can do a skill, well, how are you going to progress it? You need to push outside that comfort zone again and put yourself in those more uncomfortable scenarios that is going to test the system and work on that ability to be adaptable. Right. Okay, cool. Fantastic. Well, I'm going to have a conversation with Connor then, because we need to make this little roundtable thing happen, because it sounds like there's so much we could go into in terms of depth and subject matter and everything else, where that you've just given me another idea for another episode. So thanks for that, Adam. Really appreciate that.
Thanks,
so it's been good. It's been amazing. I'm so delighted that after a couple of false starts on both our parts, we've ended up making this podcast happen.
Absolutely. It's been an absolute pleasure, Rich. Appreciate it.
Okay, mate. So I'll wrap it up here, but just keep that part 2 in mind, because I think we definitely need to make it happen. So Adam Brazil, thank you very much for coming on the BMX Commentator Podcast. And if you've taken the time to listen to episode 11, thank you so much. And we'll see you for episode 12.
Thanks for listening to the BMX Commentator Podcast, the raddest thing to come out of Wigan since Pool's Pies and the A49. Don't forget to hit the follow button wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to share this episode on your social media channels. To get in touch with the show, drop an Instagram DM to @BMX Commentator. Now, get your ass out to the BMX track and get racing. We'll see you for another show very soon.